These news now, and NATO seems willing to wag an angry finger at Russia for its invasion of Georgia, but is not willing to go as far as the Americans would like. They wanted many of NATO's official contacts with Russia severed to show strong concern, but NATO foreign ministers meeting in Brussels are only willing to cut some contacts, even though no one's happy of what Russia has done.
There can be no business as usual with Russia under present circumstances. And the future of our relations will depend on the concrete actions Russia will take to honor the words of President Medvedev to abide by the 6-point peace plan, which is not happening at the moment, which is not happening as we speak.
This alliance, NATO, having come so far after the end of the Cold War and the collapse of the Soviet Union in achieving a Europe that is whole, free, and at peace, is not going to permit a new line to be drawn in Europe.
U.S. Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice. The CBC's Tom Perry is at NATO headquarters in Brussels, and he joins us now by phone. So what is NATO willing to do exactly?
Well, it's willing to help Georgia rebuild. NATO is sending a team of engineering experts to Georgia to assess the damage to the civilian infrastructure there that was caused by the Russian bombing. It's going to assess that and then look at how NATO can help Georgia rebuild. It's also willing, obviously, to openly criticize Moscow. As you heard the Secretary General of NATO say, the alliance says it can no longer be business as usual. So what we heard today was some pretty blunt words about Moscow from NATO, and particularly from the U.S., both of them accusing Russia of ignoring its ceasefire with Georgia by dragging its heels, withdrawing its troops there.
And what is it not willing to do?
No one in NATO wants this crisis to escalate out of control, so NATO is being cautious about offering, say, any overt military support to Georgia. It's also being cautious about how much it actually cuts back on its diplomatic ties with Moscow. Now, the main line of communication between the alliance and Moscow is the NATO-Russia Council. NATO is not going to scrap that body, but the Secretary General says that those lines of communication cannot really remain open while Russia occupies a sovereign nation. So I think that you can say that they're not slamming the door, but they're certainly going to cut things back a little bit between Moscow and NATO for the time being.
Well, Tom, how about Georgia's entry into NATO? Is that still on track?
It seems to be. It's an issue really that's split the alliance. Some members worry that if Georgia was granted full membership in NATO, then NATO would now be at war with Russia. But the Secretary General, Skepper, said today that despite the recent conflict, he believes Georgia will gain full NATO membership. And to see to that, NATO has established what it's calling a new Georgia NATO committee. It's not going to fast-track Georgia's membership, but it's supposed to remove any obstacles to Georgia eventually joining the alliance. Jackie?
Okay, thanks so much, Tom. The CBC's Tom Perry in Brussels. Meanwhile, in Georgia, it looks like the pullout of Russian troops has begun, but it's just a modest movement so far, a few trucks and tanks. In another part of occupied Georgia, a very different story. Russian troops in PROXI, the country's major port, took 20 Georgian soldiers prisoner and carried them away in trucks and tanks. And to add insult to injury, they confiscated a number of U.S. military Humvees donated to Georgia by the United States. The U.S. has also given Georgia arms and other supplies. American military advisors are in Georgia as well, helping to train Army units.